Hey everyone, welcome to PunkCast. My name is William Maxwell. I'm a student of Web3 and the owner of Punk9527. CryptoPunks are 10,000 uniquely generated characters stored permanently on the Ethereum blockchain. No punk is the same. This is a show dedicated to celebrating the punks behind the punk. My hope for this podcast is that we capture the essence of the punk culture, elevate the brand and the individual behind the punk. One last thing. Projects discussed on the show is not financial advice. Crypto and NFTs are a volatile and risky asset class. Please always do your own research. Other than that, let's go. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of PunkCast. Today we've got a close friend that's also finally based here in the same time zone as me here in Asia. We have Punk7753 joining the show today. He's a 4 Addy, an ever slightly noticeable earring, normal beard, VR goggles, and his trademark purple hair. He's an NFT art aficionado and founder of fine art photography platform Light.art. Please welcome the one and only DappPunk to the show. Dapp, how are you, man?
What's up, man? Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, finally. I was waiting for you to get back into a punk so we can have this chat.
I know, it's like we've been planning this for our lives, basically.
Yeah, so I think we've got a lot to talk about, man. So why don't we start with DappPunk and the name behind it? How did you come up with that name?
Yeah, no, it's really funny. You know, I tend to be quite lucky with names, and I tend to be someone who like thinks a lot about naming things. It's something that I really enjoy doing. Like whether it's like a friend's doing a startup, I'm like, oh, let me help you to come up with a name, right? And so when I got into CryptoPunks, I had some other random name on Discord, just sort of a placeholder when I was checking out the chat. But then finally, when I got the punk, I said, okay, no, I have a punk, and it's about Web3, so let me think of a Web3 kind of name for it. And obviously, decentralized applications, Dapp, right? It's like basically, one of the cornerstones, if not like, the most important thing about Web3. So it just made a lot of sense. DappPunk, it just kind of clicked. And luckily for me, it was available in every way. So the domain name, the Twitter handle, the ENS name and everything. So yeah, that's the story. I just got that and it became, DappPunk. And that's been my handle since.
Awesome. It's very representative of you having a punk, but there was a period when you didn't have a punk and you still called yourself DappPunk. I was kind of giving you shit for that for a while, right? But
yeah, I mean, you were for sure. Big reason I got back to punks was you, of course, man. But I mean, I did like I was attracted to punks initially because of the idea of punks, right? Like I think for me, punk in itself is a meme, meaning it's a culturally relevant kind of representation of something that goes back to the to the 70s, really, right? So, and I've always been a bit of a punk myself, not just in sort of the music I like. I mean, I like all kinds of music and I do like punk music too, but also in sort of the approach to things. And I didn't want to give up the punk name. I had another avatar for a while, which was also kind of a purple hair punk or punk looking animeta at the time. So I didn't feel like I needed to change. And I always felt like, even with my first punk, I was sort of thinking, the DappPunk is me. It's like it's my handle, and I might change the punk underneath the DappPunk, but the DappPunk is its own, like, it's its own name, right? It's its own thing. But I think now I found the sort of forever punk for it. So I'm quite happy with that.
no, it's a beauty, but I'd love to sort of unpack that story and how you got to your current punk. But why don't you start us off with, I guess, a little bit about your background? I think you've got a really interesting sort of background because it's completely different from, the stuff that you're doing now in photography. Maybe just start us off in terms of, how you got started, where you grew up and what you sort of went through in your career.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I'm from Brazil originally. So I grew up in pretty normal, kind of average middle class Brazilian sort of lifestyle. And my family migrated to the US when I was 16 or so. And then I think, from there, there's a long history of different places I lived in. So I lived in the US, lived in the UK, and ultimately ended up here in Asia, where I've been now for 10 years in Hong Kong. But I think one of the key things about growing up in Brazil in the 80s was just being aware of hyperinflation. So when I was growing up, I used to go to like the store to buy candy, whatever. And every day the price was different. Like you would just walk in and you'll be higher than it was yesterday. Right?
Like materially different?
Materially different. So like if your parents gave you like, I don't know, $10 to buy candy today and you go to the store tomorrow, you can't buy it. It's gone. Like it's going to be 12 or 13 or whatever, right? So that was a formative experience for me. And it sort of, my father worked in kind of the auto industry. My mom was an economics teacher for a while. So I got into the whole economics thing pretty early. And this macro view of the world where like, what's happening at the macro level, inflation, supply, demand, etc., really affects the everyday life of everyday people, right? And obviously there's poverty in a lot in Brazil, so kind of understanding how that comes about. So my background from that on became really interested in economics, right? So I did my master's, my undergrad and my master's in economics, partially or very much, because of that reason, right? And then from there, I worked at the World Bank for a little bit after school and ended up in Wall Street as an economist. And I spent quite a bit of time in different banks, both in New York, as I said, London and Hong Kong. And yeah, that's kind of the story of my pre-Web3 background. Like, so I was very much into macroeconomics. And then my last job, I think, sort of transitioned to, when you become macro enough, you end up looking at portfolios and you end up looking at kind of overall risks. So I ended up, my last job was a portfolio risk, had a portfolio risk for a Japanese investment bank, Onomura. And that was sort of, I finished that at the end of 2021 before I decided to jump into Web3.
Man, that's completely different from what you're absolutely doing now. And why don't you talk us about how you got into crypto and how you sort of started getting down into that rabbit hole? I think you've provided some context in terms of, the inflation sort of situation in Brazil, that must have stemmed a little bit of your interest into crypto.
Yeah, I don't. So first, I don't think my last job was that like my sort of finance job was that different. It is different in some ways. Obviously, the art aspect is very different, but in terms of the markets and understanding kind of the idea that there are multiple equilibria in any market. I know things can go into one way, they can go into another. Exact same sort of fundamentals. That's still very much something that I think about every day in crypto, and in fact, probably even more that you do when you're looking at macro. But in terms of sort of my journey, right? So I've always been someone who like to intellectually curious, I guess is the right word, right? So learning about things, whenever I hear something interesting, I go and I try to read up about it. And so my crypto story was in graduate school studying currencies and macro and all that stuff. And I learned about this currency thing called Bitcoin, right? And this is not a happy story, by the way, because I, downloaded the paper. I got really interested in it, kind of looked at it, downloaded the node, started looking at it. So my machine was sort of mining it. I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. It's like literally it was like cents, right? It was just sort of starting off. And I thought, I thought a lot about it and I said, well, this is an interesting experiment. I didn't think that, it was something that I should be looking at as an investment because it was really the value of it wasn't tethered to anything. I thought like, well, again, thinking about my economics background a little bit, it was like, well, there's multiple equilibria. It could go up, it could go down. Like, who knows? I know I'm not going to just gamble on it. And so I didn't, which obviously was, in hindsight, financially a mistake. But it was okay because I kind of stayed kind of looking at crypto for a while.
When was that?
This was like 2009, literally when the paper came out. It was like really, really early. Yeah,
Wow.
like
Okay.
I was in graduate school. I finished, my master's in 2009. It was either like around that summer or maybe like that winter, like after. But it was sort of, before I started working in Hong Kong. Yeah, so before I went to Goldman in Hong Kong. And then similar thing happened to me in 2015 when Ethereum came out. So I was like, oh, it's really cool. Like that, started learning Solidity a little bit, played around with it. I had a break between jobs, so I was kind of, messing around with it, but I never really kind of, aped in. And so when I saw NFTs in 2021 early, because it was the first time I heard about it, I was like, oh, this feels a lot like, what it was like back then. Like, it's an experimental thing. There's some new people here. And actually 2021, by then it was already quite established in some way. And I immediately, got it, I guess, and I just put in some money and bought a punk. That was my first NFT. I like transferred the money to my hot wallet. Like I didn't really know what I was doing. And I purchased that initial purple hair that I had. And I spent like the next year basically in the Punks Discord kind of learning about this stuff, and I was very, very active.
So when you say you immediately got it, like how were you thinking about that at that point in time, right? I mean, and maybe if you provide a bit of context, at what point in time was this? This was like 21-ish, 2021?
Yeah, it was like in March 21 when I really decided to get it. I ended up getting the punk, I think, in early April. But yeah, it was sort of like, it was the cultural aspect. Again, when you think about multiple equilibria, like, when you think about, market school, one way or another, often what makes a difference is sentiment, it's storytelling, right? It's that kind of stuff. And so I think it was a lot easier for me to understand the idea of storytelling within the context of an NFT because it has media, it has like a community, etc., as opposed to like a coin. Of course, coins also have stories, but I think it's a little bit more. The narratives can be more ephemeral, whereas a narrative around something like punk, as I said, it's like it's a meme from the '70s. Like people kind of understand what a punk is, right? I go to the middle of the street and I ask somebody, do you know what a Bored Ape is? They won't know, right? Because it's a new creation, or even a Pepe to a certain extent. Like, people don't necessarily know Pepes. Whereas like anybody in the world knows what a punk is. Like, they may not know what a CryptoPunk is, but they know what punk means, right? That meme is a meme that we culturally, as humans understand. So that was one thing, was the meme of it. The second was like, obviously the limited supply of 10,000. The idea there was a piece of art, and I always still looked at punks as art. And the idea that it was a living piece of art, right? Like you go in there and it's like there's a community, people are talking about it, people are trading it, and it was like, the marketplace is in the contract, right? So I kind of understood that, or that's how I saw it anyways, as like this more living art experiment with a very strong foundation of a meme, if you will, of like a story around it. And so that's how I saw punks. And then obviously from there, you start to learn about the different types of NFTs and different projects. And, in that learning journey, you go in all directions, right? So you do a little bit of crazy degen stuff when you're like trying to kind of chase silly memes, and you're like, well, no, that's not for me. And then you go into the art direction, you're like, oh, I love this art, I don't love this art, and this is for me, not for me. And then obviously a big part of that punk experience in 2021 was art blocks, right? So I was lucky to be there in that time to be able to participate in art blocks early, getting to know art blocks as a platform, what Snowflow, what Eric was trying to do, and I really got into that as well. So that's been kind of my second community NFT after punks, was art blocks.
So maybe let's just go back even further then. Like, how did you discover punks? Like, I mean, to buy a punk that early and being your first punk, I mean, how did you uncover all that? I mean, because like people got different ways of getting into NFTs. Mine was definitely not a punk, right? Like, it took me a while to open up to punks, but like, how did you discover punks?
Literally like social media, internet, whatever it was. Like I read an article. Like it was that simple. Like I didn't have a friend in it, which is kind of, in hindsight, it's kind of crazy that I literally just went and spent like whatever it was, like 50K, I think 60K on this thing, out of like just doing my research. Like I read about it, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Of course, there was, at that time there was some validation already, because you could see that NFTs, I think this was post the Beeple auction, and I think at that time it was already clear that punks were going to go to Christie's. I think it hadn't happened yet, but it was coming. So I was part of that wave, if you will, like the early 2021 class, which was kind of pre-Christie's crowd, I guess, that came in, and which there's a few of us.
At that point in time, ETH was relatively high-ish, probably about 3K or something, early 21. What did you get in at it? But
I think it wasn't quite there yet. It may have been like 2000. I don't remember, but yeah, it wasn't like so much. Yeah,
what did you pay for your punk?
it was 60, I think, and it was like 27.
2070. Okay.
ETH.
Yeah. Yeah, that was kind of crazy because people went off, and then punks were going to Christie's. Then you had Gary V, Sweet Floors, 3AC, Visa.
Yeah, Visa came a bit later. That was insane. That was completely nuts. But yeah, that was when like top of the punk market, I guess.
Yeah, that was crazy, and everybody was going, the institutions are coming for our punks, right? I think it hit like I think 148th floor or something at some stage. It was kind of crazy.
Yeah, I was kind of, you can go to the Discord. I was one of the guys who was like, guys, it's not a big deal. But of course, that was like, killjoy, right? So so shut up, Dapp, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I mean, of course, like, I'm still obviously bullish and very happy to be part of punks, and I think they're gonna go back there, in my view. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a crazy time. Look, I'm obviously of the same view as well.
But by the way, after I bumped the punk, like the market went down, because as with anything, right? You sell the news, right? So I bought it, then it went up, then Christie's, and then after Christie's, it kind of came down a bit. And then there was one point, I think it was in May, the market took a little bit of a hit, and then I think Mr. 703 also like listed like 10 punks at a time. And I actually gave him a hard time for that. I was like, man, come on, what are you doing? Like you have such a big bag, right? Go slowly.
I do remember that as well, because I think my first punk I bought and sold, and I sold just before they announced Meebits.
Okay.
And I think people, because Meebits was around that time too, right? And then people claim I missed out of the Meebits claim. And so I think once Meebits dropped, then it basically sort of tanked again. And then I think I had another entry to sort of get back in.
Yeah, because there was a Meebit premium on each punk, right? So people were literally buying punks, claiming the Meebits, and like dumping them again. There was some people were doing that just to get that Meebit mint. Yeah, that was also quite nuts.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about, the vibe and I guess your engagement with the community. Were you mostly on Discord? Are you hanging out on Twitter with other punks? And I guess which punks were you sort of hanging out with?
Yeah, like it's funny. So the first few months when I was doing this, I was still in my old job, right? So I had a very full on, like, kind of hour job, kind of per week type stuff, So I was on mostly on Discord, passing conversations. I didn't have like a lot of very like deep conversations with people, except with a couple here and there. And I was also completely undoxed, right? So people didn't know who I was because I still had this other like life, It was really when I quit my job that I started like, undoxing myself, meeting people, doing VCs, like building more relationships. I think, just trying to think like who were some of my earlier kind of punk. I mean, I definitely like had a good relationship with Mr. 703. I think he joined a bit before me when he figured out he had all these punks. But I think we had a kind of a similar take on things and not getting caught up too much on hype. So
maybe you can just share with everybody who Mr. 703 is.
yeah, so I won't share who he is, but like he's a he's a guy who had claimed punks back in the day, and he was dormant. He basically like didn't look at him for years, and then he suddenly woke up and realized, I think he was reading the news or something and realized, punks were worth a lot of money, and then looking at his wallet, and he had in one wallet 703 punks, so that became Mr. 703. So he came back into like the community, started like, hey guys, I'm here, and started get back into it. But he's also like a very tough. I mean, he was early in Pepe's, he was early in Bitcoin. I mean, he's been very like early on a lot of stuff, and we used to exchange notes. So I helped him get his first ringer. Like I got him into our blocks a bit. He got me into Claire Silver's work as well because he was friends with Claire and he was really into like that. Which obviously now in hindsight both of those were great trades, but just great things to support. I think in the end it was more than trade. It was like, oh no, like this is like the right way. Like this is the right things to be looking at in NFTs. Like good projects, good art, good people. And not getting caught up in just silly stuff.
The trades, and yeah, he's not really active much anymore, is he?
No, he's around, but he's not that. He again, like in 2021, it was tough for a lot of people in terms of like the hype, and I think he took the approaches like, he was in Twitter for a bit, and he's like, this whole thing is just like, a bit too much. So he, I don't want to speak for him, but yeah, he decided to just sort of, disengage from that and focus on other more important things for him.
And why don't we switch the discussion to art blocks? And I think the Discord back in those days for me, and I think for most people in punks, was almost early alpha, right? Anything that was worth your attention was getting floated through the punks sort of chat. And I think I wasn't sort of paying attention to the punks Discord in the early stages of art blocks and Justin Avasano and all those guys that were around. But I know you've got an interesting sort of art block sort of story and the things that you sort of were able to sort of get access to and mint. Why don't you sort of talk us through that sort of piece, an element of your punk journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, for me, it was very clear early on this idea that, NFTs that kind of stood on their own were more interesting, than NFTs that depended on sort of, people today call, say, like external dependencies, right? But like, I like this idea of like, okay, I understood that like punks were just punks, right? And then art blocks was like, well, it was just art blocks. It was pure. There wasn't anything to it. It was just art. More importantly, it was on chain, right? And so it was like this really cool. I went to like a peer, it was a bit of an on chain maxi, and I was like, wow, like this is awesome. Like it's all here in the blockchain. Like you don't need to touch it. So it's just a really great story. So I understood that, and I started buying some, and some of them I liked a lot as well. But then at the same time, it was just this insane period where like, I didn't catch the very early part of our blocks and it was just kind of slow. There were a few projects that didn't mint out in a week, like when I was around, so I didn't remember minting stuff that took a while to mint out, but it wasn't like really that, right? It was already kind of exciting a little bit. And then again, very quickly became like every time you minted, it was free money, like because it was just a gas war. There were more buyers than sellers. The prices of the pieces were flat and basically underpriced. So, just looking, taking away kind of an art collector hat, but putting more like a trader hat, it was just free money. And I remember telling like friends and family, like, this is the easiest way to make money. You just go in, you win a gas war. Most people don't know how to win a gas war. And then you can sell it, right? Like, and there's going to be more demand than supply. So it was just a mispricing there. And I think, of course they resolved that. But because of that, because it was free money, obviously create like this hype. And a lot of people started becoming attracted to it, not because of what it was. It was just because they saw that it was, this really good deal, right? If you will. And that lasted for a really long time until they put the DA in place, right? So they put the Dutch auction then. Okay, now you have a real price discovery. Sometimes you make money, sometimes you lose money because, see what happens, right? So by the kind of end of August, it must have been, yeah, you saw some DAs go for like some ridiculous prices, but then people who participated like, lost money. And then I think it established now a much more healthy environment for our blocks. And in fact, like after that period, it became kind of if you remember, there was a lot of, oh, art blocks is dead and art block sucks or whatever, this and that, especially from the people who had come in and got burned. And I think that was a good time to also, kind of get back into it. But more importantly for me, it was like, I think what Eric's done and the whole team in art blocks is built a platform that is about something very pure, which is art, right? It's like there's no mint passes, there's no Ponzi's. There's no some projects do have like a Ponzi but that's to the artist, right? For them, it's like, it's just here, come buy the art, right? And I think, ultimately the ultimate source of demand for any NFT is collectors, and you have real collectors there. And so I'm still very happy with the only art blocks. I sold a lot of my art blocks to finance kind of what I'm doing now. So I like to joke that, Snowfro was selling his punks to when he started art blocks. And so now I'm selling my art blocks to start Light.art. And hopefully one day somebody's going to be able to sell, our photos to start whatever they want to do. So trying to kind of pay it forward. But yeah, so I still have like, a Fidenza, and I have like a Chromie Squiggle, and I have a couple of other things. But yeah, at some point, I minted 2 Fidenzas, and I had like, 7 or 8 of them or something. And probably my biggest win in NFTs. And I know that was one of the questions you like to ask is it was on the Fidenzas. Yeah.
Yeah, Fidenzas are beautiful, man. So why don't we just talk about that now? Then what other collections did you sort of get into the Artbox piece that really worked out well for you? I think you had Fidenzas. I think you had some ringers as well, right?
Yeah, I did get into like ringers early. I liked my ringer, but I didn't like love it. I think there were better. I had a pretty floor one, and I didn't like love that one. And I didn't trade it very well, but I still I bought it like, I think it was like 7 ETH or something. I ended up selling it. But yeah, I really do like the Fidenzas. You and I were talking a lot about Memories of Chilling. Like, I think I really like that project. You like it too. I don't have one at the moment. I'm actually looking to buy one. I'm looking at that. Yeah, there's so many great projects. I think, it's tough because, there's a point also when you're like, well, I love this piece, but it's just, so expensive right now. And I just can't justify for me to be holding this. So yeah, so there's a little bit of that. And there's a lot of that happened with me with art blocks. Like, I had a lot of pieces that I liked and ended up like not keeping. I do keep my Fidenza because I really love. I printed it, I have it on the wall, and and that's one of my kind of core holdings, if you will.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful one. I think that's the ultimate grail for most art collectors in the AB. Besides a Chromie, I think Fidenzas is probably the one that's sort of up there. And maybe why don't we just go back a little bit to your CryptoPunk then? So maybe this first question about your first CryptoPunk. Why did you sell?
So I sold I think it was like within the hour, maybe a couple hours after the Yuga acquisition announcement. So it was sort of like, well, they announced this, and I was sort of like, it was a bit of a shock. It wasn't a shock because you kind of, I think some people were kind of even discussing it. It was a bit of a dark time for punks, right? So there was a lot of FUD. There was a lot of people, fear, uncertainty of that. There was a lot of people coming into the punks Discord and saying, how, punks were terrible and they didn't give IP. And then Larva Labs had made that thing with the V1s where they fumbled that. And it was just like a really negative time for punks.
Can you just maybe just share a little bit of insight? Because I think I was punkless when the Yuga acquisition happened. Like, what was some of the narratives and conversations that were being had around that point in time?
Well, I think that there's 2 different things that were happening. The first was the utility narrative, right? So, Yuga was doing very well, and it was like about, utility, right? Like, and that utility, by the way, if you go back in the Punk's Discord, the discussion of utility in NFTs goes back to 2017, right? Like, it's not new. But at that point, because of Yuga's sort of, success in terms of raising their floor price and even flipping punks, it was sort of, well, punks don't have utility, we need to have utility. Like, are we going to get our IP? I cannot do commercial rights. You had that piece, right? And then you had also this whole other view, which was the also related to rights, which was the CC0, CCO kind of narrative. We had nouns kind of gone off and do their own thing, and there were a couple of very vocal nouns and very vocal BAYC holders who were coming into who were also punk holders, who were coming into the punks Discord and saying, either it was like devs do something or devs do nothing, but at the same time, nobody was happy, right? And I saw, as I said earlier, like, I saw punks as art, right? Like, that's kind of how I thought of it. And it's sort of one of the first art experiments around this whole NFT movement of shared communities. And so when Yuga bought it, I thought, okay, well, I think that gets resolved. Maybe we are going to go into a utility NFT kind of path. And so I felt like I don't know what punks are anymore, right? Like I didn't think punks were something that you would just sell and then to a company that was trying to develop IP kind of stuff. And when you're an investor and I was to be a portfolio risk manager, like I said, like I kind of, you have to know what you have in your portfolio. And I was like, I don't know what I have anymore. And it was immediate. Like it was sort of like, almost like second nature to me. Like, you have a portfolio, information changes. You got to, when information changes, you got to change your mind, right? It wasn't easy emotionally because I enjoy the punk and I enjoy the community, but it was like, well, I just have to be very straightforward about what I'm going to do. And then on top of this, I mean, there are a couple of other secondary reasons, which was I did feel that the macro picture had changed and we were in a bear market. I was looking for stuff to sell anyways. So I was like, well, then, this might have to be the one that I'll sell, And so it turned out good because I turned out pretty well because I sold the punk and some of it I put into stables as well, which turned out to be a good trade. But yeah, like it was really about the community kind of figuring out what it was, and then trying to kind of wait and see what Yuga was going to do and whether punks are going to be continue to be what I thought they were going to be, or they're going to be something else, right?
I mean, what do you think Yuga could do with punks now? Like, I mean, I think they're being pretty good to date, but the thing that sort of is on my mind is around they paid a certain amount of money for punks. They haven't been able to monetize. That sort of question still looms on my mind.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, a little bit because you don't know what pressures they'll be under in the future, right? But at the same time, I'm like, well, I think they did monetize it already, and the way they monetize it is Bored Apes were always going to be second to punks, even if the price was higher, like from a branding standpoint, right? And it was a defensive play in my views. Like, you buy the big project, you buy the punks, now it's part of the ecosystem. I could see a world where Yuga didn't buy punks and then it would be just another competing with Azuki or something, like, or Colonex, or it would be another second tier project, Whereas now it's like, well, no, they own it. They own the punks. They own the biggest and the first and the most kind of recognized within the system now. And I think that sort of was a defensive play that was really 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 smart for them. So I think that's one. So they did monetize it. The second, I think they made all the right noises in terms of saying, okay, this is actually an art project. We're not gonna give utility. We're not gonna and they brought in Noah, who comes from that art background. And I think the more important to me even was, I think the community has now come around to that. I think nobody's asking for utility. We're having these jokes around, we're gonna get a punk's what's it called, lunchbox, right? So I think the meme became, okay, like, we're not an utility project. People stop asking for that. People stop asking for just kind of all that stuff the CCU. So the nouns left, and the sort of utility guys have sort of either left or they just came to the conclusion that no, actually we're better off in the way we are. And then in the end, we still have this last safeguard, which is punks have their own contract. If Yuga decides to do something people don't like, punks are punks. Like, they could do whatever they want. Like, you could just continue to trade in your own terms, something else in somewhere else. So I'm a little bit more comfortable, but I think it comes down to, like, I think Yuga made the right noises and the community has come around and is a new community, right? So the other thing was, when I joined, I was not an early OG, but it was still like, I don't know, 1,000 people maybe, in punks. And then by the end of that year, we had like 3,500 or something. So just think about that in terms of community management, right? Like, you have every single person that owns a punk, or not every single store, that a large percentage of those who own punks were new, right? So they were kind of learning about the community, what it was, what they wanted to be, and it's a living experiment. I think now we got to a point where there's a new community, the new people, including myself, including you, right, who are taking the whole the whole experiment forward in a really positive way. So I'm very excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, same, man. I think it's really positive final words that you sort of mentioned there, and I'm pretty optimistic about punks too. I think there was a bit of a dark phase, trying to figure out who we were and what we sort of meant, but I think we're sort of finding and building our way through, for sure. Maybe we can jump across to, I guess, your current punk then. So I understood why you sold Punk7753. So he's a beautiful punk, and I didn't really notice he had an earring until I looked him up. It's really faint. Like, it doesn't even. It's probably. Is it hidden? Because it's
Yeah,
not
it's
even like a
hidden.
yellow.
Yeah, you can't see it. It's a hidden trait, which makes me like it more.
Yeah, it's even more special, right? You sort of start uncovering extra traits, for sure. But
But the thing about hidden traits, there's a whole philosophical debate about them, right? I don't know if you've had a discussion in your podcast before, but like, do they really exist, right? Because, I mean, they're not in the image, right? There's no metadata, right? Like, I don't know, how does that work to have a hidden trait? Basically, it was a spreadsheet that Matt sent around back in the day, we had all the traits of all the punks and all the numbers, and it was generated that way. But I don't think that trait there's anywhere on chain that you can say that it exists. And so there's this really weird thing, like it's a hidden trait. It's really truly hidden, right? Like we know it's there. The image doesn't show, right?
Now that's interesting. I think you got to trust the code, right? I mean, if it was algo driven, I don't think they're going to.
Yeah, but there is no code. Like you can look it up. Like go where do you see that there is that trait? Like it's in the website, but it's not on chain, which is a whole nother thing. But yeah, it is there. Like we know it.
No, it's an interesting point. I don't know. Maybe if there's like some really hardcore collectors, they'll probably find a little bit more value in this later on. There's probably like only one or two other punks that I've come across with a hidden trait, so there hasn't been that many actually. It'd be good to sort of understand how many. But talk to me about this particular punk, 7753, VR goggles, purple hair, normal beard. He is a beautiful, stunning punk. Very DappPunk, I must say. Well, how did you come across picking the traits and this particular punk?
So look, I mean, it was funny. I have to go back all the way to my first punk, which was like when I was buying punks, right? So my plan was I'm just gonna buy one of these, and I'm just gonna buy a cheap one. Like I didn't want to go and splurge or anything. So I'm browsing, and I think it was what's his name, 0x113, like the terraforms guy. So we're on DM, and we're like, hey, I think it was him who was helping me out. And then I was looking at a blue bandana one, and it was okay. And then, he's like, oh, that one is, looks pretty floored to me, like it doesn't look that good, whatever. And then I was looking to buy it, and then someone just like sniped it and bought it. I was like, damn. Then I was like, okay, I'm just gonna buy one that I like, and it was like the floor purple hair. It was like, I like this one, it looks great. It was like a chin strap one, 3696. And so I just, put a bit more money into my wallet, and I just bought that one, and that was it, right? Like, and it became my thing, and I wore that like every day, never changed my profile picture for like the whole year basically. And it became like I was the main purple hair person. Like it was me and then Kevin Woozy, who's now like a Bored Ape, but we both had purple hairs, and it just became, I think, purple hair. So when I sold the punk, I still needed to have purple hair. So my other profile picture was in this animator who had a purple hair. And it just became my thing, like purple hair, and the animator also had these goggles and stuff. So when I went to look, it was like, well, it's purple hair. It has to be purple hair, like a purple hair maxi, and it looks, amazing. It looks great. And he got the DApp thing because it's got the VRs, like, it's like something a bit more techy, and obviously a beard, which I also have, so a little bit, a little bit unshaven always. So it kind of it works for me, and it's, for me, it was like my grail. And I worked to get this punk. First, I was trying to get it from Kalish. He ended up selling to someone else, and then I chased the guy, and and I ended up getting it. So it was and I also was looking for a punk. I know this might be controversial, but I wanted to get the V1 as well, just to kind of not have to deal with that stuff. And so I looked for a punk that the V1 was reachable. So I know that Mr. 703 had claimed this. So I bought the punk, and I just reached out to him and I said, hey, can you give me the V1? So we worked out a deal on that, and that was that. So I have the pair.
It's a beautiful purple hair punk for sure. Just a side note, the other purple hair punks that are notable is obviously Stray Bits.
Yes, but he didn't have purple hair at the time.
That's true. The other one was Steve Aoki. I don't know if you remember. He had one for a while.
He did come in later in ball one. Yeah. And there's been purple hair. Now there's a lot of purple hairs in photography, which is quite cool. We have a little purple hair photography mafia as well. They're relatively rare, right? Like they're like 160 of them. 167 or something like that. So it's a good trait. I like it.
No, it's beautiful. It's definitely a trademark, that punk for sure. And you spoke about V1 punks. Maybe I normally ask this towards the back end of.
I know. I was like, should I open that?
Nah, let's talk about it, man. Like, I mean, well, what are your views on V1 punks? And more importantly, why did you feel the obligation to go off and find the V1 pair for your punk?
I was not a big fan of the whole like rollout of V1, and I think some of the community there, one was a bit antagonistic, but there's also antagonists from both sides, from the V1s and the non-V1s. And then, and there was some people in that community who also I'm not like super fan of. But so the community was like, didn't like it when they came out. So it's not something I was looking at too much. But then I think, it's a 1-year-old kind of thing since they wrapped them. And I think, there's a good chance that as a collectible, there's some value there in terms of, they were part of the history, right? They are part of the history of punks. I know I'm someone who sides with the creators, and I think the creators didn't like them, didn't want to use them and all that. So that's fine. But at the same time, as we just discussed, like, punks are their own thing. We're not just, it is owned by Yuga, but it's not like, we also own it and we're part of the art. And so there is this aspect of decentralization. V1s exist, they will be traded. And I didn't want somebody else to have a V1 of my punk kind of using it everywhere and whatever. And so it's almost like a hedge or kind of safety thing. It's like, oh, I'll just buy this. It's, they're trading at about 1/10 of the V2s, right? Or the R of our CryptoPunks, if you will. And I feel like that spread possibly might come down. So let's see, but I don't have a strong view either way. Like, I'm not a V1 person, but I'm also not like super anti them. So it's just like, well, I'm going to make a big investment in my Forever Punk. But sadly, I sold a couple of my Claire Silver Genesis to buy the V1, and, now they massively pumped. So it's a very expensive V1 in the end of the day, but that's okay. It happens.
All good. And if money wasn't an issue or ETH wasn't an issue, what would be your dream punk?
I think this is it. This is the one I have. Like, I love it. It's like, I don't know, I don't want to get any other one. Like, I'm happy with it.
Yeah, no, it's a really cool one, man, and well done on it.
Thanks, and thanks for keep bugging me for like months. Say, when are you getting back into punks? When are you, like, it's like, my wife was like, yeah, you're definitely gonna get one after all these guys bug you like all this time.
Yeah,
yeah, there was definitely some peer pressure there, but it wasn't really. I mean, I was decided to get it. It was just finding the right one, right, as you know. So, and which I did.
It wasn't just me. It was
a whole
also
crew. Yeah,
King and Art. So shout out to those guys here as well. But the water's warm, Dapp. The water's warm.
There you go. Yeah.
And mate, so we started talking a lot about your journey and how Art Blocks basically funded, your sort of current venture. And I remember actually just talking to you during your early punk days as well. I think I bought into one of your early projects.
Yeah, area. Yeah.
Yeah, areas. And then so maybe talk through a little bit about that, and then how you sort of transitioned and found your way into Light.art, the photography sort of platform.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, I think I always say that like a lot of people go through this journey where it's like, there's stages of NFTs. It starts like, right click save as. And even if it only lasts for like a minute, people are like, well, why not I just right click save it? And then you start, collecting it, and then you become a DJ. And then at some point you're like, okay, I'm going to build, right? And that's like one of the last stages, if you will. Not everybody goes through all of them, but I definitely went through those stages. And so now I wanted to build. And for me, one of the things that was interesting was the idea of connecting the real world to the digital world, if you will. Like, how can we use NFTs and blockchain and Web3 into the real world experiences, right? So I started this project called Area. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but the idea was basically like building a metaverse, or, not building a metaverse because I don't like that word either, but like just thinking of the metaverse as where we are, right? As, people using technology together in the real world. And we wanted to do basically like a land sale for real pieces of land on top of the real world. So I think some people may be familiar with a project like Super World, or there's a couple of projects like that that have pursued that path. The difference is that, I think we wanted to do something more scarce and play on the scarcity, where some of the projects that have been launched are more kind of like, billions of pieces of land, right, that you can buy. But the idea was connecting NFTs that are related to our life, right? And I've always been like someone who like likes photography, and I've been like a kind of a hobbyist. I don't call myself a photographer, and as part of that project, we thought, okay, what is the first type of NFT asset that is got a real potential use case today that is related to the real world? And then it was photography. So we started this photography platform, Light.art, as part of this bigger project of Area. Right. And, we could have focused on AR because a lot of people were looking towards AR, but I felt like the technology wasn't there. Photography was more doable and more achievable. But, you start a startup, you start a project, you end up learning about what the market wants, what the market is ready for, etc. And at some point it became clear that, we weren't minting out, and it was sort of like, time to pivot. And photography was something that was really exciting. It was really, a project on its own that we were already doing. We had like a bunch of really, really awesome artists that had signed up for it. So we just had a small team. So let's just focus entirely on the photography. Let's pivot out of Area, which, you were a holder, as you said. And as part of that, I just said, okay, I'm just going to refund everyone. So I basically, anybody who had bought an Area from us, I sent them a refund. And I said, okay, guys, we're just going to do Light now. If you want to, if you're part of the Area, you can get into our next drop if you want. If not, just, here's your refund and good luck and, and all that. So that's what we did. We folded Area and we started Light. We had already started, but we continued now with Light. And it's a totally, self-funded. We don't have VC money or anything, but it's a small team. But we are. The idea is, I think photography in itself as a category has huge potential because it's so ubiquitous, right? Because so many people consider themselves photographers. Because there is no scarcity, and digital goods, sort of NFTs, are perfect for creating scarcity for that. And I think we haven't gotten photography right in the space yet. Like, I mean, I think there's been some very successful initiatives like Fellowship. I'm good friends with all the different teams that run different photography projects, but we haven't yet cracked that nut yet very well. And I think it's a bit mind blowing if you think about it, right? That generative art, which you would think is like a niche thing in the real world, it's the biggest art category in NFTs, right? And so I think you'll be much more likely that you would see something like photography, for example, become much bigger over time. And so that's our bad. We are very much focused on curation, so curating really well and not minting a lot. So we've done we've only done 3 collections so far, and we're releasing it slowly. Our curation is done by board, so we have people like Claire, NorCal guy, and B, Beauty and the Punk, Feral Punk. There's like a few punks in our board as well, but there's a few photographers that are very well known as well. So we got artists, we got collectors, and we go through this curation process, and we, I think, have a very cool and small community that is, again, going back to the whole art blocks thing. Is, I think, the success of our blocks for me was that it was pure. It was about the art. And I think when I spoke to Snowfro with Eric earlier, that was one of the things that came away from like his early advice when I was doing my projects. Like, just, it's nice when it's pure. It's about the art. And so we just want to keep it that way. And, we have collectors who like the art that we have. And I think that's all you can ask for.
The beautiful pieces. Obviously, I've not trying to shill my own bags here, but I do have a few pieces from your Genesis collection, and I must say they are pretty stunning. Also, nice to know that you got a few punks on your curation board too, right? So Claire Silver, Guy Norcal, some pretty big names in as punks, and also in the photography space. Although I don't think many people knew Norcal had a punk. I need to get him to try and change his profile picture.
Yeah, he needs to get a punk. Yeah, but he's got that so iconic now, his own icon there. So I think it's gonna be hard to get him to change. But yeah, I didn't know he had a punk, actually, to be honest. Too told me so. But yeah, he's a really great guy, and obviously, so I mean, I've been lucky to have good people in our board. It's a pretty chill process. Like, we don't meet that often, but when we do, it's like a very good conversation. And I have like some really well, I won't like shill or anything, but we have some exciting things coming up that I'm pretty happy about. So. In terms of artists that we're bringing in, and type of collections we're doing. So yeah, let's see how it all goes.
Looking forward to it, man. This is exactly what I love to sort of see. Is a lot of our punks actually just building and creating and doing stuff, right, and leveraging the punk brand in the right way. So and pure is a really beautiful word too, man. Like, I don't think you see a lot of pure projects that are out there anymore. They sort of feel very extractive, right? So it's a beautiful sort of positioning you're going for.
Yeah, I mean, look, having come from someone who has a huge background in economics, and I understand tokenomics. I mean, I've gone through like insane amount of like modeling for economics. And like, some of these projects you literally need to have a PhD in economics to actually understand where the alpha is, or how to make money, or and it's great. Like, some people, they're geeking out, and smart people kind of trading against other smart people. Like, I'm so not into that vibe right now. Like, my vibe is like, just do stuff that has value, and people will like enjoy and love. And that's kind of, and in the end, it's like, I'm really loving helping artists tell stories. So like, if you look at our first 2 curated collections, they're really story rich, right? So the first one, is about, from Elisa Yanacone. It's about sexual violence, and she's a rape survivor, and she uses art to kind of elevate other survivors. I mean, it's such a powerful collection. And I've had like people, we just had a real life exhibition, or she had a real life exhibition in Dubai a couple of weeks ago, and people would come to like her pictures and like start crying. Like, is that kind of powerful? So like, just having, giving her that platform to tell that story. And then the second collection we did is now more about mental health, which is also a really important story to tell. So, which is by Tony Zella, which is a great, like, OG photographer in the space. So yeah, so it's like, just having, creating those spaces for collectors and artists to connect, and creating real value there. It's so rewarding.
I think that's a beautiful thing about the stuff that you're doing, and you sort of see these other platforms giving a voice to these creators, right? And it's beautiful to sort of see those stories come through. So when you're looking at, I guess, the current NFT landscape at the moment, I know we're in a bit of a bear market, but are there any collections that you're eyeing right now?
You're gonna laugh, obviously, because you know which one I'm gonna mention, right?
I think I do, but I just want you to say it.
No, so like I mean, look, in addition to art, right? So I do think there are a lot of really great artists. Obviously, light and photography, I think, are massively undervalued, and I think we have a lot to run in that space. On the PFP side, I'm really interested at the idea that while I'm a punk and I don't care about the whole IP thing, I do think there is something there. There are some PFP projects that will succeed at the whole like developing an IP, right? Developing a world and the idea of creating a community and a decentralized way to enjoy, consume, create, a franchise. It seems like a really exciting idea, and I do think somebody's going to crack that, right? I've seen good efforts, but I haven't seen anybody like kind of quite get there. So you got me into this project, which you shielded to me, called Icon, which I have been really happy to be in part of it. So, I'm very glad that you did, because there's some real, like really, really strong IP creation in that project, right? I think they have, so just by background, there are like, the team is Tom DeFalco, who used to be the editor-in-chief of Marvel, Adam Polina, who's like a guy who also was, massive, huge name in comics as an artist, but he also worked in video games like GoldenEye and back in the day God of War. They have the developer, like chief creator of co-creator of Grand Theft Auto, so they also have games, and they have a whole element around ARG, right? So alternative reality games, and the guy who basically created that genre is part of the team. So there's some really strong like IP creation, like sort of creators, right? Creatives in that project. And I think they're going to do amazing stuff. And the project's like so cheap, like the floor is like 0.05, I think.
I'll have to get a couple back into my bag, Dapp. My wallet got drained a couple weeks ago, and
I know, I'm so sorry, man. That's terrible.
they took my icons. But it's funny because, like, I remember that conversation. That was the first time we met at Soho House.
Yeah, it was.
We're like a bunch of proof guys hanging out, and we caught up and we started talking about projects. And I just said, "Oh, I'm having a look at this one," and then we go home, and then you basically like started sweeping floors.
Yeah, I did my research. I was like, "Oh, this is awesome! Like these guys know, they're really great, and they're really chilled. Like they're not trying to like. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like some people love, some people like to trade the attention, right? Like, oh, it's an attention economy, it's attention. Like, just buy the stuff that has attention. I'm actually like, if there's no attention, but it's something valuable that is real, then I think that's where the alpha is, right? Like, so I think there's something here that's valuable, it's real. I mean, of course, it's a startup, right? They may fail, but at the time, like, there is value. I'd much rather pick these things up for 0.05 than buying the last shiny thing that's already at like 5 ETH or whatever, and they're doing like amazing work. So yeah, I went and I bought a bag and I keep buying, and I have like, I think 180 or something, like I have 170 in my main wallet, but I have some others, and I have the liquidity pool. So I got a lot of these, and probably second or if not first largest holder together with Pranksy. So yeah, I like the project. I recommend you guys checking it out. If anything, they have a radio station already. Check out the radio station. Amazing music. When I'm working, I'm just listening to their radio, so it's just fun. It's a good vibe.
Nice. That's Icon, everybody. And then just reflecting on your NFT career today, any sort of memorable wins or losses worth mentioning?
NFT wins and losses. Biggest win, as I said, was Fidenza's by a good margin, I think. Biggest loss was probably Animetas, but I mean, it's still playing out. But I bought a bunch of those. Yeah, it didn't work out. I think they're still, they're supposed to be launching their monsters now, which could be a really interesting catalyst. But I think I bought it also at the top of the market. So if you look at the ETH price, what it was when I was buying these, yeah, it was a pretty big, mark to market down now. I mean, I still hold all of them. I'm not selling, occasionally like I may sell one or two if I need like the liquidity, but to do like a trade or whatever. But there's so, I think the art is really great. Pixel Gustavo is a great pixel artist, but yeah, it hasn't really worked out for me like financially.
And who's your favorite punk personality when you look across, I guess, the Twitter sphere?
Yeah, I don't think I don't think I can say Twitter sphere, but I was gonna say like because he's a friend and somebody I respect is a Mr. 703. He's not on Twitter anymore, so I think he's one that I think and the reason is because he's kind of authentic, right? Like he's authentic, like he's the kind of person that is just, yeah, I don't always agree with him, but he's not there trying to be somebody else or trying to like he's not like has an angle to try to like be somebody else to get you to do something or whatever. He's just doing his own thing, and yeah, I think that's probably him. Yeah.
And if you were to describe punk culture in a few words, how would you describe that?
Authentic. For me, authenticity is like it is what it is. The punk movement from the 70s and the 80s, in the end, that's what it was about, right? It's about like being authentic, being your own self. And I think that's one of the things that is cool about punks today also. It's like going back to like, I just said about Mr. 703, like he's just authentic and he's just his authentic self. I try to be my authentic self. And it's not a PFP project that tries to merge into being something. It's like we're all different. We all have our own stuff going on. And I think that's kind of freeing in some way. And I think that's what the culture is about. It's about being just authentic and doing your thing.
Love it. Maybe another side question too, actually. We've spoken about V1 punks. We've spoken about Euchre acquisition, your feelings towards that. How do you feel about BTC punks or ordinals?
I think it's too early to tell what's going to happen there. Let me put it this way, I'm not getting involved. I think for a couple of reasons. So I think one is, and this might be, something that I may get crap for, but, I'm not somebody who's buying Bitcoin or using Bitcoin right now. And primarily is because, and I like Bitcoin. I think it's amazing, the whole creation myth with Satoshi, and obviously it's the first one that succeeded, etc. But I don't see right now the reason why we need to be using proof of work, really. Yeah, okay. I mean, some people have argued there's there's some additional benefits in decentralization, et cetera. But I just don't see that it's something that we need. I think I'm very happy to work with Ethereum. I'm not an Ethereum maxi, but it's the proof of stake is just makes so much more sense from a kind of an energy use standpoint. So I'm not touching anything Bitcoin. So that's kind of like and I'm not judging. Like people want to use it, fine. But like personally, my choice, I don't use it, so I'm not getting involved. Now, in terms of just looking at that whole ecosystem, I think it's going to be exciting when they do their own thing, right? Like again, going back to authentic, right? Like punks on Bitcoin, it's a derivative. Like it's cool, like, but it's a derivative. Like I would like to see something that is authentic to that platform, that makes sense for that platform. And I think that's true for any other blockchain, right? Whether it's Solana or whatever. I think the good projects are like, okay, we have a different technology, slightly different from whatever Ethereum. And, how does that work, and can we create something for ourselves? And I'd like to see more of that. And I think I've been seeing like there's been some projects that are trying to do that, and I wish them luck.
Well said. If you could pass on a message to the next owner of your beautiful purple hair punk, what would you like to say to them?
You're part of the art. You're part of the art now. Like, I don't see punks as like the CryptoPunks are not just the picture, like, or the NFT, right? It is, as I said, like the contract includes the marketplace, the community, everything is part of this sort of art. I think that's what makes it so interesting and exciting. The art's not the pixels, the art is us, right? And so if you're, us here having this chat is kind of, we're here because of Matt and John, right? Like they created this, and so we are part of it. And I think the next person who owns my punk, if it ever happens, 300 years from now, whatever, they will be part of the art too, and they'll take it. They'll be continuing the experiment.
Beautiful. Dapp, this was super fun session, man. Like I think we spoke about things I hadn't sort of asked you before.
Yeah.
I think we're always busy gambling at the races or degening together. But this is super fun, man. Thank you so much for your time. I guess, are there any sort of closing comments, and how can sort of people find you?
Yeah, look, I'm a very approachable. My DMs are open. It's hard to keep track of them, but if people wanna, send me a message, yeah, on Twitter is probably the best. DappPunk @DappPunk. It's my handle. And I think if you're a punk and you're listening and you want to reach out, say hello, please do. If you're not a punk, but you just want to do something cool for the Web3 space, and you're working, out there building or whatever, I'm happy to chat with you. And yeah, I mean, we're still early, as we say. It's still, and what I mean by that is like we kind of all like know more or less each other, even if know personally. Like I feel like it's still a small enough community doing really exciting things. So it's exciting, and so I'm happy to connect with people.
Perfect. Well said. I always thought you were going to say, if you don't have a punk, go get a punk first before you speak to DappPunk.
No, I mean, I'm happy to help you pick. I've helped a couple of people pick punks. In fact, Farrell Punk, which I don't know if you guys know, if you know him, but I helped him get his 2 punks like the day before the Visa announcement. So he was so happy because he got it and then immediately 2x'd.
I think we've had this conversation before, but the Farrell Punk's punk is actually my first punk.
Oh, really? No way.
5176, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Cool. Well, man, this was fun. And guys, thank you so much for listening. And we'll be back next week with some more fun punks. Bye for now.